The nightmares always started the same way. A woman's scream, the scent of jasmine, then darkness, followed by rain pelting against glass. Alara Whitlock jolted awake, her small hand instinctively reaching for the silver locket around her neck. Her only connection to a past she couldn't remember. Bad dreams again. Sister Margaret's kind face appeared in the doorway of the dormitory, illuminated by her flashlight. Alara nodded, her 9-year-old frame trembling beneath the thin blanket. St. Clair's orphanage in Newport wasn't known for luxury, but what it lacked in comfort, it made up for in Sister Margaret's kindness. "May I see it?" Sister Margaret asked, sitting on the edge of Alara's bed. Alara handed over the locket, a tarnished oval with intricate engravings and half an inscription. "To EW. You will always be my G." The rest had been worn away, or perhaps it continued on another piece. Sister Margaret had told her it was clutched in her tiny fist when she was found outside the orphanage gates 6 years ago, soaking wet and shivering. "Your mother must have loved you very much," Sister Margaret whispered, passing it back. "Then why did she leave me?" Alara's voice cracked. Sister Margaret had no answer. She never did. The next morning, Alara stood with the other children in St. Clair's main hall. The orphanage was receiving important visitors, potential donors or adopters, most likely. The children were lined up by age, scrubbed clean, and wearing their best clothes, which wasn't saying much. "Remember to smile," Sister Agnes hissed, pinching Alara's shoulder as she passed behind the line of children. A tall man in an impeccable suit entered, followed by a willowy woman whose pearl necklace probably cost more than everything in the orphanage combined. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, welcome to St. Clair's," Sister Agnes fawned, stepping forward to greet them. Thaddeus Blackwood, Boston's real estate mogul and philanthropist, nodded curtly. His steel-gray eyes scanned the children with clinical detachment. Beside him, Vivian Blackwood's gaze was softer, almost sad, as she surveyed the lineup. "We've prepared a tour," Sister Agnes began. "That won't be necessary." Thaddeus cut her off. "We'll make our donation, as discussed." "Of course, Mr. Blackwood," Sister Agnes replied. "Children, you may introduce yourselves." As the children stepped forward one by one, Alara noticed Vivian Blackwood watching her. When it was Alara's turn, she stepped forward with rehearsed politeness. "Hello, I'm Alara Whitlock. I'm 9 years old." "Whitlock?" Vivian asked, suddenly alert. "Is that your surname?" "It's what was on the note with her," Sister Margaret explained, stepping forward. "She was left with just her first name and that surname." "And this," Alara added, holding up her locket. Vivian Blackwood knelt down, her expression unreadable as she took the locket in her manicured fingers. For a moment, something flashed in her eyes. Recognition? Fear? Then it was gone. "Vivian," Thaddeus warned, his voice low. "She has her eyes, Thaddeus," Vivian whispered, almost inaudibly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Thaddeus Blackwood's expression darkened, but then he smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll take this one," he announced, pointing at Alara. Sister Agnes gasped. "Mr. Blackwood, adoption is a complex process. There are home studies, paperwork." "I'm aware," Thaddeus cut her off. "Start the process. My lawyers will handle the details." Alara stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. The Blackwoods wanted her? Why her? Later that night, Sister Margaret helped Alara pack her few belongings. "Do you think they really want me?" Alara asked. "They chose you specifically," Sister Margaret replied, carefully folding Alara's sweater. "That's unusual." Mrs. Blackwood seemed to recognize my locket. Sister Margaret paused. "Perhaps it's a common design. Or perhaps she knows who I am," Alara suggested, hope rising in her chest. "Don't get your hopes up, child," Sister Margaret cautioned. "Rich people like the Blackwoods, they often have complicated reasons for what they do." 3 months later, after a suspiciously expedited adoption process, Alara found herself in the back of a Bentley, crossing the Newport Bridge toward her new life in Boston. Thaddeus was on his phone, barking orders about a development project. Vivian sat beside Alara, occasionally patting her hand, but saying little. The Blackwood mansion in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood was like something from a movie, all limestone and columns with a sweeping circular driveway. Inside, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Donovan greeted them. "This is our housekeeper," Vivian explained. "She and her daughter, Maeve, live in the East Wing. Maeve is about your age." She'll need new clothes, a proper education, Thaddeus said, finally putting his phone away. And a bedroom. Use the blue room. Not the one near, Vivian started. The blue room, Thaddeus repeated firmly. It's closest to us. Alara followed Mrs. Donovan up a grand staircase, past oil paintings of stern-looking people she assumed were Blackwood ancestors. The blue room was larger than the entire dormitory at St. Clair's, with a canopy bed and windows overlooking a manicured garden. Dinner is at 7 sharp, Mrs. Donovan informed her. Mr. Blackwood doesn't tolerate tardiness. Left alone, Alara sat on the edge of the bed, her small suitcase pathetic against the opulence surrounding her. She clutched her locket, tears welling in her eyes. This should have been a dream come true, but something felt wrong. From her window, she spotted a girl her age sitting on a garden bench, reading. Maeve, she presumed. Someone else caught in this strange, beautiful prison. Alara didn't know it then, but the Blackwoods hadn't chosen her out of charity. They hadn't chosen her because they wanted a child. They had chosen her because of who her mother was, a woman whose name Alara wouldn't learn for many years to come. A woman named Celine Winters. Alara stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the girl who stared back. 3 years had passed since the Blackwoods brought her to Boston. At 12, she wore a navy blue uniform from Westfield Academy, her once wild auburn hair tamed into a sleek ponytail. The silver locket, her one connection to her past, remained hidden beneath her crisp white blouse. Miss Alara, you'll be late, Mrs. Donovan called from the hallway. Alara grabbed her backpack and hurried downstairs where Thaddeus waited impatiently by the door, checking his watch. 7 minutes, he noted coldly. I expect 5 tomorrow. In the black SUV, Thaddeus reviewed her weekly schedule without looking up from his tablet. Your piano instructor says you're making adequate progress, but your French needs work. I've arranged for additional lessons on Thursdays. But Thursday is when Maeve and I, the Donovan girl, can entertain herself. Thaddeus cut her off. Remember, you're a Blackwood now. Your associations reflect on this family. Alara bit her lip. Despite the adoption, she'd never been permitted to take their surname. She remained Alara Whitlock, kept at arm's length even as they molded her into their idea of perfection. Vivian mentioned you asked about medical school. Thaddeus continued, his tone making clear what he thought of the idea. The Blackwood business empire requires a head for finance, not medicine. Sentimentality doesn't build legacies, Alara. The SUV pulled up to Westfield Academy's imposing gates. Before exiting, Alara asked the question that had been burning inside her for years. Why did you choose me? For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Thaddeus's face, something almost like fear. Then it vanished. Because Vivian wanted a project, he replied dismissively. Run along now. At school, Alara moved like a ghost through marble hallways. Despite 3 years at Westfield, she remained an outsider. The other girls, daughters of Boston's elite, sensed her difference, like wolves detecting an imposter among them. Hey, charity case, Whitney Palmer called as Alara passed the senior lockers. Heard your daddy donated another wing to Mass General, buying his way into heaven. Alara kept walking, her face expressionless. The Blackwood name commanded respect, but everyone knew she wasn't really one of them. That afternoon, Alara found Maeve waiting at their secret spot behind the garden shed. At 15, Maeve Donovan had grown tall and wiry, with a perpetual scowl that softened only around Alara. I swiped these from the kitchen, Maeve grinned, producing chocolate cookies wrapped in napkins. Cook made them for some charity thing tomorrow. Thaddeus added more French lessons, Alara said, biting into a cookie. Thursday afternoons. Maeve rolled her eyes. Of course he did. Heaven forbid you have 5 minutes to yourself. I found something, Alara whispered, glancing around before pulling out a crumpled newspaper clipping. In Vivian's desk drawer. The clipping showed a younger Thaddeus at a gallery opening, his arm around a striking woman with auburn hair similar to Alara's. The caption read, Beacon Hill developer Thaddeus Blackwood with rising star artist Celine Winters at Whitman Gallery opening, 2005. She looks like you, Maeve breathed. You think she could be my mother? I don't know. But look at the date. 2005. I was born in 2006. And her last name, Winters. Not that far from Whitlock. A twig snapped behind them. The girls whirled around to find Vivian standing there, her face ashen. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, snatching the clipping. "I found it," Alara admitted. "Is she my mother? Did Thaddeus know her?" Vivian's hand trembled. "Never mention this woman's name in this house. Do you understand? Never." That night, Alara lay awake, her mind racing. The look on Vivian's face had been pure terror. Whatever connected the Blackwoods to Celine Winters, and potentially to Alara herself, was dangerous enough to frighten even Vivian. Years passed. Alara grew into a young woman of quiet determination. Though Thaddeus pushed her toward business and finance, she excelled in science, eventually securing a spot at Harvard Pre-Med despite his disapproval. Her relationship with the Blackwoods remained complicated. Thaddeus treated her more like an investment than a daughter, while Vivian oscillated between protective warmth and inexplicable distance. On her 18th birthday, Alara received an unexpected gift, a checking account with enough money for 4 years of medical school and then some. "From me, not Thaddeus," Vivian explained quietly. "Your future should be your own." "Why now?" Alara asked. Vivian's eyes darted to the doorway, checking for Thaddeus. "Because you deserve a chance to escape." "Escape what, Vivian? What aren't you telling me?" "There are things about this family, about Thaddeus, that you're better off not knowing," Vivian whispered. "Just promise me you'll use this money to build your own life, far from here." But Alara didn't leave. Something kept her tethered to the Blackwoods, an unresolved mystery she couldn't abandon. Instead, she moved into an apartment near campus, but maintained her connection to the family that had shaped her life so profoundly. At 23, Alara was halfway through medical school when Thaddeus called her to his office in the Blackwood Tower downtown. "Impressive," he admitted grudgingly, reviewing her academic record. "Perhaps I underestimated your stubbornness." "I prefer to call it determination," Alara replied. "The Blackwood Medical Group is expanding," he continued, ignoring her comment. "We're opening specialized surgery centers. I could use someone I trust to oversee certain operations. I'm specializing in trauma, not administration." Thaddeus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You'll find our centers uniquely equipped for trauma cases. Think about it." As she left his office, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The Blackwood Medical Group had always been peripheral to Thaddeus's real estate empire. Why the sudden interest in specialized surgery? That evening, she met Maeve at a coffee shop near the hospital. Despite Mrs. Donovan's disapproval, the two had remained inseparable over the years. Maeve now worked as a paralegal and lived in a cramped apartment in Somerville. "He's hiding something," Maeve said after hearing about the meeting. "My mom mentioned shipments arriving at the Brookline Clinic after hours. Medical supplies not logged in the inventory." "That could be nothing," Alara reasoned. "Or it could be everything," Maeve countered. "Remember that reporter who was investigating Blackwood Healthcare subsidiaries last year? The one who suddenly dropped the story and moved to Arizona?" Alara twirled her locket between her fingers, a nervous habit she'd never outgrown. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you be careful. Thaddeus Blackwood doesn't suddenly develop an interest in people, not unless they serve a purpose." 2 years later, Alara stood in the grand ballroom of the Blackwood estate, a glass of champagne in hand, watching Boston's elite mingle at the annual Blackwood Foundation benefit. At 25, she had grown into her beauty, tall and poised, with her mother's auburn hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. Across the room, Thaddeus worked the crowd masterfully, while Vivian performed her dutiful role as the perfect hostess. Neither of them were her parents in any real sense, Alara reflected. They had given her a home, an education, and opportunities most orphans could only dream of. But they had never given her what she truly sought, answers. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," a male voice observed. Alara turned to find herself face to face with a man she didn't recognize, tall, with sharp features softened by kind eyes. Unlike the other men in standard black tie, he wore a midnight blue tuxedo that stood out in the sea of black. "Dr. Reese Castellano," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "New neurosurgeon at Blackwood Memorial." "Alara Whitlock," she replied, taking his hand. "And you're right, I would rather be anywhere else." "Then why stay?" he asked, his direct manner catching her off guard. Before she could answer, she caught sight of Vivian watching them from across the room, her face a mask of alarm. When their eyes met, Vivian shook her head slightly, a warning. Little did Alara know that this chance meeting would unravel secrets buried for decades, secrets that would reshape her understanding of who she was and why the Blackwoods had brought her into their crystal mansion all those years ago. "So what's your connection to the illustrious Blackwoods?" Reese asked, leading Alara toward the terrace doors. "It's complicated," Alara replied, glancing back at Vivian, who was now making her way across the ballroom toward them, determination written across her face. "Isn't everything with families like these?" His smile revealed a slight dimple in his left cheek. Before Alara could respond, Vivian appeared at her side, her grip firm on Alara's elbow. "Darling, Senator Harrison was just asking about your research at Harvard," Vivian said, her voice pleasant but her eyes sharp as she regarded Reese. "Dr. Castellano, I see you've met our Alara." "You're Alara?" Reese raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware the Blackwoods had a daughter." "Ward," Vivian corrected swiftly. "We've had the privilege of guiding Alara since she was 9. "How fortunate for everyone," Reese replied, his gaze lingering on Alara. "Perhaps Miss Whitlock and I will continue our conversation another time. I believe we may have mutual interests at Blackwood Memorial." "Alara's schedule is quite demanding," Vivian interjected. "If you'll excuse us, Dr. Castellano." As Vivian steered her away, Alara glanced back to find Reese watching them, his expression thoughtful. There was something in his eyes, something that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. "Stay away from him," Vivian whispered once they were out of earshot. "Why? He seems perfectly. Trust me on this." Vivian's voice was urgent. "Thaddeus hired him for specific skills, not his bedside manner. He's dangerous." "You're being dramatic." Alara pulled her arm free. "Besides, I'm 25, not 9 anymore. I can decide who to talk to." Vivian's face softened. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" "That's what I've never understood," Alara challenged. "What are you protecting me from?" Before Vivian could answer, Thaddeus appeared, his hand possessively on his wife's shoulder. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes cold. "Fine," Vivian replied quickly. "Just girl talk." Thaddeus nodded, then turned to Alara. "I see you met Dr. Castellano. Brilliant surgeon. Harvard Medical, like you. Top of his class." "Vivian seems to think I should stay away from him," Alara said, watching Thaddeus carefully. Something flashed across his face, surprise, and maybe concern, before his features settled back into their usual mask. "Nonsense. In fact, I've arranged for you to work with him during your trauma rotation next month. He's pioneering some revolutionary techniques our investors are quite excited about." Vivian paled. "Thaddeus, I don't think. It's decided," he cut her off. "Now, both of you should circulate. We have donors to charm." As he guided Vivian away, Alara couldn't miss the tension between them, or the way Vivian's hands trembled around her champagne glass. The next morning, Alara met Maeve for their Sunday brunch ritual at a small cafe in Cambridge. "So how was the annual parade of Boston's richest vultures?" Maeve asked, stirring her coffee. "Enlightening," Alara replied, describing her encounter with Reese and Vivian's strange reaction. And then Thaddeus contradicted her completely, practically pushing me into working with the man. Maeve frowned. "That's weird, even for them. Usually they present a united front." "There's something else," Alara leaned forward. "I looked him up when I got home. Reese Castellano's brother died 3 years ago during routine surgery at Blackwood Memorial's private wing, the one Thaddeus runs personally. Coincidence? Maybe. But get this, after his brother's death, Castellano left a prestigious position at Mayo to investigate malpractice cases. Then suddenly, 6 months ago, he accepts a job at the very hospital where his brother died, working for the man who potentially caused it." Maeve whistled low. "Either he's an idiot or he's there for answers," Alara finished. "Just like me." 2 weeks later, Alara began her rotation at Blackwood Memorial. The hospital's main floors were modern and bustling, but her assignment took her to the exclusive upper floors, the private wing reserved for wealthy patients and experimental procedures. On her first day, Nurse Jenkins handed her a keycard. "This gives you access to the restricted areas. Dr. Castellano requested you specifically for his team." "What exactly does his team do?" Alara asked. Jenkins glanced around before lowering her voice. "Officially, neurological trauma. Unofficially, no one really knows. His patients come in after hours, sometimes through the private entrance. Records are kept separate." Alara's unease grew as she made her way to Reese's office. The private wing had always been Thaddeus's domain, operating under different rules than the teaching hospital below. Patients here were nameless file numbers, their care overseen directly by Blackwood-selected physicians. Reese was reviewing scans when she entered. He looked up, those intense eyes focusing on her with startling precision. "Alara Whitlock," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Right on time. Dr. Castellano. Reese, please. We're going to be spending a lot of time together." He studied her for a moment. "You have remarkable eyes. Storm-colored. Like your mother's." Alara froze. "You knew my mother?" "No," he replied carefully. "But I've seen her photograph." "That's impossible. I was abandoned as a child. There are no photographs." Reese stood and locked his office door. "There's a great deal about your history that's been kept from you, Alara. As there's a great deal about my brother's death that's been obscured. What does my mother have to do with your brother?" "Possibly nothing. Possibly everything." He moved to his computer and pulled up a secure drive. 3 years ago, my brother came to Blackwood Memorial for a minor procedure. He never left. The official report cited complications from anesthesia, but when I requested his records, key files were missing. "That doesn't mean I spent 2 years investigating," he continued. "I discovered a pattern of patients at Blackwood facilities whose records were altered. Young, healthy patients who died from complications during minor procedures. Malpractice. Organ harvesting," Reese stated flatly. "Healthy organs disappearing, no donor records, and a lot of wealthy patients suddenly recovering from terminal conditions requiring transplants." Alara's mind reeled. "That's insane. Thaddeus wouldn't he?" Reese pulled up a series of documents. "The FBI has been building a case against Blackwood Medical Group for years, but they can't get inside. That's where I come in." "You're working undercover," Alara realized. "But why tell me?" Reese's expression softened. "Because when I was gathering intelligence on Thaddeus Blackwood, I found something unexpected. Records from 16 years ago, involving a woman named Celine Winters." Alara's hand instinctively went to her locket. "The artist." "More than an artist," Reese corrected. "She was a whistleblower. She discovered financial irregularities at the Blackwood Foundation, large sums diverted to offshore accounts. She threatened to go public." "What happened to her?" "Officially, a car accident left her with traumatic brain injuries. She was declared dead 2 years later." He paused. "But no death certificate was ever filed. Instead, a private patient with her biometric data has been receiving care at a Blackwood facility in Switzerland for the past 16 years. Alara struggled to breathe. "And you think this woman, Celine, is my mother?" "I think Thaddeus Blackwood is obsessed with her," Reese replied. "And I think he brought you into his home because of who you are to her." "Why are you telling me this?" "Why now?" "Because Thaddeus is accelerating his operation. More patients are coming through, more complications occurring. And because he's purposely put you in my path." Reese leaned forward. "I need to know if you're with him or against him." "I'm not with anyone," Alara said shakily. "I just want the truth." "Then help me," Reese urged. "Help me expose what's happening here before more people die. Before your connection to Celine Winters puts you in danger too." Alara stared at him, her mind racing with implications. If what Reese said was true, the family that had raised her, the man who had controlled every aspect of her life, was not only a criminal, but might be responsible for her mother's fate. "I need proof," she finally said. Reese nodded. "That's what we're going to get. Together." From the hallway came the sound of a keycard swiping. Reese quickly closed the files on his computer as the door opened to reveal Thaddeus Blackwood, his smile not reaching his eyes. My 2 favorite doctors," he said smoothly. "I trust you're getting acquainted?" "Just reviewing protocols," Reese replied evenly. "Excellent." Thaddeus's gaze shifted between them, assessing. "I have a special patient arriving tonight. I'd like you both to attend." His eyes lingered on Alara. "Consider it a learning opportunity." After he left, Alara turned to Reese. "What does that mean?" "It means," Reese said grimly, "that we're about to see firsthand what happens in Thaddeus Blackwood's private operating rooms." Outside the window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and threatening, a perfect mirror to the turmoil brewing inside Blackwood Memorial's walls. At midnight, Alara stood beside Reese in the observation room of Operating Theater 12, a state-of-the-art suite accessible only through the private elevator that required Thaddeus's personal key card. The rest of the surgical team wore masks that covered most of their faces, and no one used names, only numbers. This doesn't feel like standard protocol, Alara whispered. Because it isn't, Reese replied under his breath. Watch and remember everything. The patient was wheeled in, a young man, early 20s, unconscious but otherwise healthy-looking. No chart accompanied him, only a digital tablet that the anesthesiologist, 6, consulted briefly. Patient 457, 6 announced. Donor procedure theta. Donor procedure. The words sent a chill through Alara. She scanned the room for any indication of the supposed recipient, but saw none. Thaddeus entered, now dressed in surgical scrubs with a mask that hid all but his penetrating eyes. He nodded to the team and took his position at the head of the table. Begin, he ordered. What followed was not the routine appendectomy listed on the official schedule. Instead, the team harvested the patient's kidneys with clinical precision while his vital signs were artificially maintained. Alara felt nausea rising in her throat as she watched Thaddeus place the organs in specialized containers. This wasn't treatment. It was theft from an unwitting victim. Extraordinary, isn't it? Thaddeus's voice startled her. He'd appeared at her side while the rest of the team closed the patient. One healthy donor can save so many deserving lives. Did he consent to this? Alara managed to ask. Consent is such a limited concept, Thaddeus replied. Some are destined to serve a greater purpose than they could ever understand. And who decides this purpose? Reese asked, his voice carefully neutral. Thaddeus's eyes crinkled above his mask, a smile. Those with vision, Dr. Castellano. Those who see beyond conventional limitations. He turned to Alara. I wanted you to witness this, to understand the empire you're poised to inherit. I never asked for an empire, Alara said. No one worthy ever does. Thaddeus patted her shoulder. You'll come to appreciate what I've built, what I've preserved for you. After he left with the harvested organs, Alara turned to Reese, her face ashen. What happens to the patient? Best case, he wakes up believing he had an appendectomy, never knowing what was taken from him. Worst case, complications arise, and he never wakes up at all. We need to stop this, Alara whispered fiercely. That's the plan, Reese replied. But we need evidence that will stick. Patient records, donor lists, payment trails. The next morning, Alara accessed the hospital database using the credentials Thaddeus had given her. Most files were standard, but certain patient numbers were restricted, accessible only through a separate system. Miss Whitlock, a voice interrupted her search. Dr. Werner, Thaddeus's head of security, stood in the doorway of the records room. This area is restricted during system updates. I have clearance, Alara showed her badge. Not today, Werner smiled thinly. Mr. Blackwood requests your presence at the main office. Alara had no choice but to follow him to Thaddeus's downtown office, where she found not Thaddeus, but Vivian waiting, her elegant features drawn with worry. Leave us, Vivian told Werner, who hesitated before complying. Once alone, Vivian locked the door. What are you doing, Alara? My job, Alara replied cautiously. Don't play games, Vivian hissed. I saw you with Castellano. I know you were in the restricted files. Then you know what Thaddeus is doing, Alara countered. The illegal surgeries, the organ harvesting. Vivian closed her eyes briefly. It's more complicated than you understand. Then explain it to me, Alara demanded. Explain how the man who raised me is stealing organs from innocent people. Explain why you've known and done nothing. I've done what I could, Vivian whispered. Where do you think your trust fund came from? I've been setting aside money for years, trying to create an escape for you. Why didn't you just tell me the truth? Because the truth has teeth, Vivian's voice cracked. Because knowing puts you in danger. What about Celine Winters? Alara asked. Is she my mother? The color drained from Vivian's face. Where did you hear that name? It doesn't matter. Is she? Alara, please. Vivian grabbed her hands. Leave Boston. Use the money I gave you. Disappear before what? Before I find out what Thaddeus did to her? Before I learn why he really brought me into your home? Yes, Vivian said simply. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. I need to know who I am. You're Alara. Vivian touched her cheek gently. The girl I've watched grow into an extraordinary woman. The girl I wished was truly mine. Something in Vivian's eyes made Alara pause. You've always tried to protect me, haven't you? Even from him. I've failed more than I've succeeded, Vivian admitted. But yes, always. Later that afternoon, Alara met Reese in the hospital chapel, one of the few places without surveillance cameras. We need to move faster, she told him, relaying her conversation with Vivian. She's afraid of what Thaddeus will do if he discovers I'm asking questions. With good reason. Reese pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. Marcus Lee, investigative reporter. He was looking into Blackwood Medical Group last year before suddenly dropping the story. The one who moved to Arizona. Alara remembered Maeve mentioning him. He didn't move, Reese said grimly. He was found dead in his apartment 2 days ago. Apparent suicide. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. You think Thaddeus. I think we're dealing with someone who eliminates problems permanently. Reese took her hand. This is getting dangerous. Maybe you should step back. No. Alara shook her head. I can't walk away now. Not when we're getting closer to the truth. Reese studied her, his expression conflicted. Alara, I need to tell you something. When I started this investigation, it was about justice for my brother. But now what? Now I'm afraid I've put you in the crosshairs, he admitted. Thaddeus is watching us. The way he looked at you in that operating room, like you were part of his collection. It scares me. I've been part of his collection since I was 9 years old, Alara said. The difference is, now I know it. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, an unspoken understanding that had been building since that first meeting at the charity gala. Impulsively, Alara leaned forward and kissed him lightly. What was that for? Reese asked softly. For caring about the truth. For caring about me. That night, Alara couldn't sleep. Her conversation with Vivian played on repeat in her mind, alongside images from the operating theater. She pulled out the old newspaper clippings she'd kept hidden for years. Thaddeus and Celine Winters at the gallery opening. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Storage room B, basement level. Now, M. Maeve. Only she would sign with just an initial. Grabbing her hospital ID, Alara hurried to the staff entrance of Blackwood Memorial and made her way to the basement. The storage room was dimly lit and filled with old equipment. Maeve stood by a filing cabinet, her face tense. What's going on? Alara asked. Mom found something. Maeve handed over a flash drive. Patient transfer records from 16 years ago. A private ambulance from the accident scene on Route 1 to Blackwood's facility in Switzerland. Celine's accident, Alara realized. The same day she threatened to expose Thaddeus's financial fraud, Maeve confirmed. Mom says she remembers that night. Thaddeus came home with blood on his sleeve. Vivian was hysterical, saying he'd gone too far. Alara's hand trembled as she took the drive. This could prove Thaddeus was responsible for my mother's accident. And that she might still be alive, Maeve added. Mom says there's a patient in Switzerland who receives monthly specialist visits ordered directly by Thaddeus. A patient no one is allowed to name. The implications were staggering. If Celine was alive, if Thaddeus had orchestrated her accident and kept her hidden all these years, why would he adopt me? Alara wondered aloud. Why bring his victim's child into his home? Control, Maeve suggested. Or maybe something more twisted. You said yourself that Vivian once told Thaddeus you had her eyes. The storage room door banged open. Dr. Werner stood there, flanked by 2 security guards. Miss Whitlock, he said coldly. Mr. Blackwood would like to see you immediately. It's 2 a.m., Alara protested. Nevertheless, the guards moved forward menacingly. Maeve stepped in front of Alara. She's not going anywhere with you. Werner nodded to one of the guards, who roughly shoved Maeve aside. This doesn't concern you, Miss Donovan. Though your mother's continued employment might depend on your discretion. It's okay, Alara told Maeve, slipping the flash drive into her pocket. I'll go. As the guards escorted her to the waiting car, Alara texted Reese. Blackwood took me. If I disappear, everything you need is with Maeve. The car drove through the dark Boston streets toward Blackwood Tower, where Thaddeus kept his private penthouse office. Whatever awaited her there, Alara knew one thing for certain. The shadows were about to reveal their secrets, whether she was ready or not. The elevator ascended silently to the penthouse level of Blackwood Tower. Werner stood beside Alara, his expression unreadable as the numbers climbed higher. When the doors opened, they revealed Thaddeus standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Boston skyline glittering behind him like a carpet of stars. Leave us, he told Werner without turning around. Once alone, Alara steeled herself. Kidnapping is a crime, even for the great Thaddeus Blackwood. Kidnapping. He turned, amusement playing across his features. I simply requested your presence. At 2 a.m. with armed guards? That's not a request. Semantics. He gestured to a chair. Please sit. We're overdue for a frank discussion. Alara remained standing. About what? Your illegal organ harvesting operation? Or the fact that you caused Celine Winter's accident? If Thaddeus was surprised by her knowledge, he didn't show it. Instead, he poured 2 glasses of scotch, offering one to Alara, who declined. You've been busy, he remarked, taking a sip. Though I'd expect nothing less from Celine's daughter. The confirmation hit Alara like a physical blow. So it's true. Of course it's true. Thaddeus set down his glass. Why else would I have taken in a 9-year-old orphan? Charity. He laughed coldly. I built an empire by recognizing assets, Alara. You were an asset. An asset to what? Your sick obsession with my mother. Something dangerous flashed in Thaddeus's eyes. Your mother was brilliant, beautiful, and utterly self-righteous. She thought she could destroy everything I'd built. I couldn't allow that. So you tried to kill her. I tried to teach her a lesson, he corrected. The injuries were more severe than intended. And now you're keeping her in a vegetative state somewhere in Switzerland, Alara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. While you raised her daughter. I gave you every advantage, Thaddeus replied sharply. Education, connections, opportunities most people would kill for. I shaped you into someone worthy of the Blackwood name. You stole my life. Alara's control finally broke. You took me from her, made me believe I was abandoned, all while keeping her prisoner. Thaddeus moved with surprising speed, gripping Alara's arm painfully. I saved you from a mediocre existence with a woman who valued principles over power. I made you exceptional. Alara wrenched her arm away. You made me a pawn in your sick game. And now you've aligned yourself with Castellano. Thaddeus continued as if she hadn't spoken. Another sanctimonious crusader who doesn't understand the greater good. The greater good. Alara laughed bitterly. Is that what you call stealing organs from innocent people? I call it redistribution of resources, Thaddeus replied coldly. Some lives are worth more than others. The market simply reflects that reality. Reese's brother, was he one of your resources? An unfortunate necessity, Thaddeus shrugged. He matched a client willing to pay 8 figures for a healthy heart. Business is business. The casual cruelty of his admission left Alara breathless. You're a monster. I'm a visionary, he corrected. And despite your melodramatic outrage, we both know you're more like me than you care to admit. That brilliant analytical mind, that drive to succeed, those aren't from Celine. Those are qualities I cultivated in you. You're wrong, Alara said firmly. And you've lost. The FBI has everything they need to bring down your operation. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Thaddeus's face. You're bluffing. Patient records, financial transactions, witness testimonies. It's over, Thaddeus. His expression hardened. Nothing is over until I say it is. Werner. The office door opened immediately, revealing Werner and the guards waiting outside. Take Miss Whitlock to the secure facility, Thaddeus ordered. She's experiencing a psychiatric episode and requires supervision. You can't do this, Alara backed away. People know where I am. Your concerned father is simply getting you the help you need. Thaddeus smiled thinly. Who would question that? As the guards moved toward her, Alara's phone rang. She fumbled for it, grateful for any interruption. Don't answer that, Thaddeus warned. Alara defiantly hit the accept button. Hello. Alara. Reese's voice came through, tense and urgent. Where are you? Blackwood Tower, she replied quickly. Thaddeus is trying to. Werner snatched the phone and ended the call. That was unwise, Thaddeus said softly. Now Castellano will need to be dealt with as well. Terror gripped Alara. If you hurt him, you'll what? Thaddeus raised an eyebrow. You seem to forget your position here. A commotion outside the office drew everyone's attention. Vivian burst through the door, her face flushed and hair disheveled. Thaddeus, stop this madness, she cried. I won't let you hurt her. This doesn't concern you, Vivian, Thaddeus said dismissively. She's Celine's daughter, Vivian countered, moving to stand beside Alara. And for 16 years, I've helped you maintain this lie. No more. Thaddeus's expression darkened. Think carefully about what you're doing. I've thought about nothing else for 16 years, Vivian replied, her voice steadying. When you brought Alara into our home, I convinced myself it was mercy, that at least one of them would have a life. But it wasn't mercy. It was another form of control. Mrs. Blackwood is clearly distressed, Werner interjected. Perhaps she should be sedated as well. Try it, Vivian threatened, pulling a small recorder from her pocket. Everything Thaddeus just said about Celine, about the organ trafficking, it's all recorded. One call, and it goes to the FBI, the press, everyone. Thaddeus stared at his wife with cold fury. You would betray me? After everything I've given you. You gave me a prison, Vivian replied. A beautiful, gilded prison where I've watched you destroy lives while I stood by silently, including the life of a little girl who deserved to know her mother. The standoff was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass. All eyes turned to the office windows, where Reese now stood amid shattered fragments, having apparently scaled the building's exterior maintenance ladder. Dramatic entrance, Thaddeus remarked dryly. I'll add destruction of property to your charges. The only charges being filed tonight are against you, Reese replied, breathing hard from the climb. The FBI is downstairs with a warrant. Apparently, Marcus Lee kept very detailed records before his suicide, records that were just delivered to federal agents. You're lying, Thaddeus snarled. The building's security system began blaring, and the elevator indicator showed it was ascending to the penthouse level. It's over, Thaddeus, Alara said quietly. Nothing is ever over for men like me, Thaddeus replied, suddenly calm. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at Alara. If I lose everything tonight, so do you. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Vivian threw herself in front of Alara as Thaddeus fired. The bullet caught Vivian in the shoulder, spinning her into Alara's arms. Werner, seeing the situation deteriorate, dropped his weapon and raised his hands. Reese launched himself at Thaddeus, wrestling him to the ground as the elevator doors opened to reveal FBI agents with drawn weapons. Federal agents. Drop your weapon. Thaddeus, pinned beneath Reese, laughed bitterly. You think this ends here? Money talks, justice walks. I'll be out within a week. Not this time, Reese said, hauling him to his feet as agents took custody. The Swiss authorities have already raided your facility. They found Celine Winters alive. Alara, supporting the wounded Vivian, froze at these words. My mother is alive. In a medically induced coma for 16 years, Reese confirmed. But alive, and now receiving proper care. As Thaddeus was led away in handcuffs, he locked eyes with Alara one last time. She'll never be the woman you imagine, and you'll never escape what I made you. I already have, Alara replied steadily. Hours later, in the quiet of a hospital room, Alara sat beside Vivian's bed. The bullet had been removed, and doctors assured her that Vivian would recover fully. Why did you do it? Alara asked softly. Why risk your life for me? Vivian's eyes were clearer than Alara had ever seen them, no longer clouded by fear or secrecy. Because I couldn't save your mother. But I could save you. You knew all along who I was. From the moment Thaddeus brought you home, Vivian confirmed. You have her eyes, storm-colored and fierce. I recognized them immediately. Then why keep silent all these years? Fear, at first, Vivian admitted. Then a misguided sense of protection. Thaddeus convinced me that revealing the truth would destroy everyone involved. So I tried to give you what I could, stability, education, opportunities to escape when the time was right. The trust fund, Alara realized. My silent apology, Vivian nodded, then winced at the movement. I've been monitoring Celine all these years, ensuring she received proper care despite Thaddeus's orders to keep her sedated. When you started asking questions, when you met Reese, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. You could have told me the truth then, and risked Thaddeus discovering I'd betrayed him. He would have moved Celine, eliminated any evidence. I needed to be certain you'd be safe when the truth came out. A soft knock interrupted them. Reese stood in the doorway, his expression grim. The FBI needs your statement, he told Alara. And there's something else you should know. What is it? Alara asked, sensing bad news. Thaddeus's operation wasn't just about organ trafficking. It was about genetic research, specifically hereditary traits associated with regenerative abilities. I don't understand. Celine's family has a rare genetic marker, Reese explained. Thaddeus discovered it when she was hospitalized after the accident. He kept her alive to study it. and to see if you inherited it. That's why he pushed me toward medicine, Alara realized. Why he wanted me in his research facilities. You were never just his ward, Reese said gently. You were his most valuable research subject. The revelation should have shocked her, but somehow it only confirmed what Alara had always sensed, that Thaddeus's interest in her had never been paternal. There's one more thing, Reese added, his voice softening. They're beginning to reduce Celine's sedation. In time, she should wake up. My mother, Alara whispered, the words strange and wonderful on her tongue. I'm going to meet my mother. As the first light of dawn filtered through the hospital blinds, Alara stood at the window, her silver locket clutched in her palm. Everything she believed about her life had been a carefully constructed lie. Yet amid the wreckage of those falsehoods, something precious had emerged, the truth of who she was, and the promise of who she might become. Reese joined her, his presence a quiet comfort. Are you okay? I don't know, she answered honestly. Everything's changed. Not everything, he replied, carefully taking her hand. Some things are just beginning. Their fingers intertwined as they watched the sun rise over Boston, a city where shadows were giving way to light, and truth was finally breaking free from its long imprisonment. Thaddeus Blackwood sat in the stark interrogation room, his tailored suit replaced by prison orange. Despite his circumstances, his posture remained imperial, his gaze unflinching as he faced Alara across the metal table. You look tired, he observed casually. Prison doesn't suit me, but uncertainty clearly doesn't suit you. I'm not uncertain, Alara replied. I'm here for one reason, to understand why. Why what? Why I built an empire. Why I pushed medical boundaries. Why I took in the daughter of a woman who betrayed me. Why you couldn't just let her go, Alara said quietly. Thaddeus's expression shifted subtly. Celine was special. Her genetic makeup, the regenerative markers in her DNA, could have revolutionized transplant medicine. Everything I did was in pursuit of that breakthrough. You nearly killed her. I preserved her, he countered. Those 16 years weren't wasted. The research from her case has saved countless lives. Stop pretending this was about saving lives, Alara snapped. This was about control, about owning what you couldn't have. Thaddeus studied her for a long moment. Perhaps, but my methods yielded results your ethical constraints never would have allowed. He leaned forward. The same genetic markers are in your blood, Alara. You could continue what I started, legitimately, with your impeccable credentials. Is that why you're manufacturing evidence against Reese? Because he's standing in your way? Thaddeus smiled thinly. Dr. Castellano made himself a target the moment he infiltrated my organization. His brother was collateral damage, but his crusade against me is personal. The FBI should question his objectivity. They have, Alara replied, along with his evidence. Evidence can be interpreted many ways, Thaddeus said dismissively. My lawyers are already building a case that Castellano orchestrated everything, using my facilities to conduct his own illegal operations. No one will believe that. They'll believe what money tells them to believe, Thaddeus said with chilling confidence. Your boyfriend will take the fall while I negotiate a minimal sentence. That's how the world works, Alara. Power protects itself. Outside the prison, Reese waited in the car. How did it go? He's framing you, Alara said bluntly, using his connections to manipulate evidence. We knew he would, Reese reminded her. Thaddeus won't go down without destroying as many lives as possible. The next morning brought confirmation of Thaddeus's threat. Headlines splashed across the Boston Globe. FBI investigation reveals Blackwood, doctor masterminded organ trafficking ring. The article cited anonymous sources claiming Reese had used his position to identify vulnerable patients and falsify records while Thaddeus remained unaware. Supporting evidence had mysteriously appeared in Reese's apartment overnight, financial records showing payments to offshore accounts in his name. This is just the beginning, Maeve warned when they met at her apartment. My contact at the FBI says Thaddeus's lawyers are pushing for his release pending trial. If he gets out, he'll disappear Celine again, Alara finished. And probably me too. Reese paced the small living room. We need Celine's testimony. She's the only one who can confirm Thaddeus's original crimes. She's still recovering, Alara reminded him. The doctors say it could be months before she's strong enough to make a coherent statement. We don't have months, Maeve said grimly. Mom overheard Thaddeus's security team. They're planning to move against anyone who could testify against him. including Vivian. Alara's phone rang. The hospital. Vivian had disappeared from her room. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of panic and desperate searching. Police reports were filed, hospital security footage reviewed, but Vivian seemed to have vanished without a trace. Until a package arrived at Alara's apartment. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note in Vivian's elegant script. For 16 years, I recorded everything. I'm sorry it took me so long to find my courage. This will end him. Keep Celine safe. With love, V. The drive contained hundreds of audio recordings and documents. Vivian had methodically compiled evidence of Thaddeus's crimes dating back 2 decades: financial fraud, medical malpractice, the orchestrated accident that left Celine in a coma, and detailed records of the organ trafficking operation. This is everything we need, Reese said in disbelief as they reviewed the files. Every transaction, every surgery, every victim. And her sworn testimony, Alara added, finding a video file of Vivian giving a formal statement before her disappearance. She knew he'd come after her, so she made sure her evidence would stand without her. 3 days later, federal agents arrested Thaddeus's lawyers and key associates for witness tampering and evidence manipulation. The charges against Reese were dropped as the true extent of Thaddeus's operation was revealed to the public, but Vivian remained missing. 6 months passed. The scandal dominated headlines as the Blackwood empire crumbled. Thaddeus awaited trial in federal custody, denied bail as a flight risk. Alara divided her time between the hospital in Switzerland, where Celine was slowly recovering, and Boston, where she testified against the man who had stolen her childhood. On a rainy Tuesday, as she left the courthouse after another day of testimony, Alara found Reese waiting with news that dropped her to her knees on the wet pavement. They had found Vivian. Vivian's body had been found in a remote cabin in the Berkshires. The official cause of death was suicide, a self-administered overdose of morphine. But Alara knew better. This was Thaddeus's final act of control, orchestrated from behind bars. She left this for you, Detective Morales said, handing Alara a sealed envelope. It was in a safe deposit box with instructions to deliver it if anything happened to her. Alone in her apartment that night, Alara opened the letter with trembling hands. My dearest Alara, Vivian had written, if you're reading this, Thaddeus has found a way to silence me. Don't grieve too much. In truth, I've been a ghost for 16 years, haunting the edges of a life I was too afraid to leave. My death is the final payment for my complicity. But you must live. Not as Thaddeus's creation or Celine's shadow, but as yourself. The money is in a trust he can't touch. Use it to rebuild what he destroyed. And forgive me for not being braver sooner. With all my love, Vivian. At the funeral, rain fell in steady sheets, as if the sky itself mourned. Only a handful of people attended: Alara, Reese, Maeve, and Mrs. Donovan. The once celebrated socialite Vivian Blackwood had died a pariah, her reputation destroyed by her husband's crimes. She saved us all, Maeve said quietly as they stood at the grave. Mom says Thaddeus's men were coming for her that night. Vivian warned her. She spent a lifetime atoning for loving the wrong man, Mrs. Donovan added, her usually stern face softened by grief. 2 years passed. The trial of Thaddeus Blackwood became one of the longest and most complex in Boston's history. Alara testified 27 times, enduring brutal cross-examinations and media scrutiny. Reese's testimony about his brother's death brought the courtroom to tears. Former patients who had unknowingly lost organs told their stories. But the most damning evidence came from Vivian's meticulous records. On a crisp autumn day, the verdict finally came down, guilty on all counts. Thaddeus Blackwood was sentenced to life without parole. As he was led from the courtroom, he locked eyes with Alara one last time. This changes nothing, he said, just loud enough for her to hear. I'm still in your blood. That night, Alara stood on the balcony of the small Cape Cod cottage she'd purchased with part of Vivian's trust. The ocean stretched before her, vast and unknowable. Reese joined her, his arm encircling her waist. It's over, he said softly. Is it? Alara questioned. He's still alive, still plotting. And somewhere deep inside me, there's still a part that remembers loving him as a father. That's not weakness, Reese assured her. That's your humanity, the part of you he could never corrupt. Alara turned to face him. taking in the face that had become her anchor through the turbulent years. They had grown closer through the trial, their relationship deepening from attraction to something essential and unbreakable. "I've been offered a position in Switzerland," she said. "Director of Patient Advocacy at the hospital where Celine is recovering." "That's wonderful," Reese smiled, though his eyes betrayed concern. "When would you start?" "I haven't accepted yet. I wanted to ask you something first." Alara took a deep breath. "Would you come with me?" Reese's face broke into a genuine smile. "I thought you'd never ask." 6 months later, they settled in Geneva. Alara spent her days at the hospital, developing protocols to protect vulnerable patients, while Reese joined the neurology department, his reputation restored by the trial's outcome. Together, they visited Celine daily. Her recovery was painfully slow. After 16 years in a medically induced coma, Celine's brain needed to relearn basic functions. Her auburn hair, so like Alara's, was streaked with silver now, her once vibrant face lined with the passage of time. But her eyes, those storm-colored eyes that matched Alara's perfectly, were bright with determination as she worked through grueling therapy sessions. Speech came back first, then limited mobility. By the 18th month, she could sit up unassisted and carry on conversations, though her memories remained fragmented. On a snowy December evening, as Alara read aloud from one of Celine's favorite books, her mother reached out and touched the silver locket around Alara's neck. "I gave you that," she said suddenly, her voice clear and certain. Alara froze. "You remember?" "Not everything," Celine admitted. "But that, I remember that. It was your 3rd birthday. It has an inscription." With trembling fingers, Alara opened the locket. "To EW, you will always be my GOD. Guiding star, as I will be your safe harbor," Celine finished. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "The other half is mine." From her bedside drawer, Celine pulled out a chain holding the matching piece of the broken locket, salvaged from her personal effects when she was first hospitalized. When the two halves were joined, they formed a perfect whole. 3 months later, Reese proposed during a sunset walk along Lake Geneva. Alara said yes without hesitation. They set a date for the following spring, when the Alps would be covered in wildflowers. By then, Celine had progressed to walking with assistance. There was talk of her leaving the facility for a supervised apartment nearby. The doctors called her recovery miraculous, a testament to the regenerative genetic markers that had kept her alive all those years. What no one said was that those same markers now showed in Alara's blood work. The legacy Thaddeus had tried to exploit remained dormant within her, a double-edged sword of healing and potential destruction. But that was a battle for another day. For now, Alara Whitlock was simply a woman planning her wedding, a daughter reconnecting with her mother, and a survivor building a future from the ashes of her past. Morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Pierre Cathedral in Geneva, casting kaleidoscopic patterns across Alara's white gown. She stood alone in the antechamber, a moment of quiet before the ceremony. 3 years had passed since Thaddeus's conviction, 2 since she and Reese had moved to Switzerland. In that time, Celine had progressed from halting words to complete sentences, from wheelchair to walker to now, miraculously, just a cane. Alara touched the silver locket around her neck, hers something old. The other half hung around Celine's neck, awaiting their reunion at the altar. 10 minutes, Maeve announced, poking her head in. As maid of honor, she'd been running interference all morning, keeping everything on schedule. "You ready?" "I think I've been ready for this my whole life," Alara smiled. "I just didn't know it." The cathedral doors opened on cue. Alara took a deep breath and stepped into the aisle. Reese stood at the altar, tall and handsome in his tuxedo, his face lighting up as he spotted her. In the front pew, Celine waited, supported by her physical therapist, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Halfway down the aisle, Alara faltered. A woman had slipped in through a side door, a woman she didn't recognize. Tall, elegant, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a chignon. For a moment, Alara thought it must be a late-arriving guest. Then the woman turned, and Alara saw her face. Celine. Not the Celine sitting in the front pew, but another Celine, stronger, more composed, her features unmarked by years of medical sedation. Alara froze, her bridal bouquet nearly slipping from her fingers. The music continued, but she couldn't move. Then Reese was beside her, his hand steady on her elbow. "What's happening?" she whispered. Before he could answer, the Celine in the front pew stood with surprising steadiness. The Celine by the side door approached. They stood face to face, identical women, one bearing the ravages of captivity, the other somehow preserved by time. "I'm sorry," the newcomer said, her voice carrying in the hushed cathedral. "I never meant to disrupt your day, but I couldn't miss my daughter's wedding." A murmur swept through the assembled guests. Alara looked from one Celine to the other, her mind refusing to comprehend what her eyes were seeing. "Twins," Reese whispered. She had a twin. The Celine from the pew reached out and took her sister's hand. "You came," she said softly, "after all this time." "As soon as I heard you were awake," the twin replied. "I've been searching for 16 years. Alara's legs threatened to give way. "I don't understand." The newcomer turned to her, eyes identical to her own. "My name is Celine Winters. Your mother was my twin sister, Serena. We were both at the gallery that night with Thaddeus. Both of us witnessed his crimes. He came after us, but I escaped. Your mother wasn't so lucky." "But the records," Alara stammered. "The DNA tests." "Identical twins shared DNA," Reese reminded her gently. "The test would have matched either of them." The truth crashed down on Alara like a physical weight. The woman she'd been caring for, the woman she believed was her mother, was her aunt, and her real mother. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I was alone for 20 years. In hiding," Celine explained. "Thaddeus's men were hunting me. I couldn't risk exposing you. I watched from a distance when I could, sent anonymous tips to investigators tracking his operations. When Serena finally woke up and the news broke about his arrest, I knew it was time." The ceremony forgotten, Alara found herself enveloped in the arms of two identical women, her mother and her aunt, both parts of a past that had been stolen and was now, improbably, returned. "I have your eyes," Alara whispered to her mother. "And your father's smile," Celine replied, touching Alara's cheek. "He was a good man, an artist like us. He died before you were born." "Thaddeus knew who I was the moment he saw me at the orphanage," Alara realized. "That's why he took me. To control you," Celine nodded, "and to draw me out of hiding. But Vivian protected you the best she could." The mention of Vivian brought fresh tears. "She died, keeping your sister safe." "I know," Celine said softly. "She sent me letters over the years, through channels Thaddeus couldn't trace. She loved you in her way. So did I," came a deep voice from the back of the cathedral. Alara turned, her blood freezing in her veins. Thaddeus Blackwood stood in the doorway, his prison orange replaced by an impeccable suit, flanked by men who were clearly not wedding guests. "How?" Reese began. "Money talks," Thaddeus shrugged. "Appeals work. Technicalities exist. You're supposed to be in prison," Alara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was released this morning," he replied, "just in time for the wedding. I wouldn't miss my daughter's special day." "I am not your daughter," Alara stated firmly, "and you're not welcome here." Thaddeus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "After everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done to me," Alara corrected. She turned to the security team Reese had insisted on hiring. "Please escort Mr. Blackwood out." As they moved toward him, Thaddeus held up a hand. "No need for dramatics. I came only to give the bride my blessing." His cold gaze swept over Celine. "And to see with my own eyes what I suspected for years, that there were two of you. The perfect control group for my research." "Leave," Celine commanded, stepping protectively in front of her sister. "You've lost, Thaddeus. Your power, your reputation, your freedom. This isn't your day. It's hers." For a moment, it seemed Thaddeus might resist. Then, with a slight nod, he turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing on the cathedral floor. The weight of his presence lingered, but Alara refused to let it overshadow this moment. With her mother on one side and her aunt on the other, she continued her journey down the aisle to where Reese waited with steadfast love in his eyes. As they exchanged vows, Alara felt the two halves of the silver locket, one around her neck, one around her aunt's, growing warm against her skin. Two pieces of a whole, separated by circumstance, but always meant to be reunited. Just like their family,